So would you rather be famous or would you rather be rich? Obviously, it's best to be both. But the sad truth is that there are lots of people out there who are highly capable and very, very good at what they do, but their level of revenue simply doesn't reflect their level of expertise. So what's going on here? And if you're one of these people, how can you get your bank account to mimic your expertise and cultivate a business that rewards you both emotionally, financially, and intellectually? I'm Ivana Taylor. I'm the publisher of DIY Marketers and your host for Bizapalooza Chat. And today, we're going to show you how to monetize your expertise. Now, our guest today is Dorie Clark. She's a marketing strategy and brand expert. She's the author of The Entrepreneurial You new book. Check it out on Amazon and stand out. She is right here, right now. Dorie, welcome to Bizapalooza Chat.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here and be participating.
I'm so glad to have you. I've always said to people that I've been following you for a while, but in the introduction of Entrepreneurial You, your new book, did I say Amazon? Check it out. It may be the book site too. You said something that really resonated with me. First, you talked about people who were highly capable and experienced and whose earnings weren't commensurate with their talents. And then you talked about your entrepreneurial journey. So talk a little bit about some of the most helpful tips that you learned from your journey and from your interviews that had the biggest impact on your business.
Absolutely. So I think the first one that is worth mentioning, and in many ways it underlies the entire book, is the importance of cultivating multiple revenue streams in your business. I think oftentimes we are taught in the business world, something's working, double down on it, which of course is true. However, the converse is also true, which is that if you double down too much or too exclusively on one thing, it begins to put you in peril because if business circumstances change, if a key client shifts, if there's some kind of an external shock that you're not anticipating, you are left in the lurch. And so if you create multiple income streams in your business, it enables you both to hedge against the downside and capture more of the upside. And really in writing Entrepreneurial You, I wanted to make the point, it's easier than you might think. You're not doing vastly different things. You're just taking the same core intellectual property that you do, tweaking it a little bit, putting it in a different format, and it enables you to capture a lot more revenue.
I'm really glad you talked about that because one of the things that makes me completely bananas is when I see small business owners who are trying to get multiple streams of income, but then what they're working on doesn't match. Like they have all these disparate things. So, I'm glad that you mentioned do you have some tips on maybe how to select things that are congruent with your brand and the business you're trying to build so you're not like 1,000 points of light?
Sure. The first one is simply about pacing yourself because sometimes people get a little overexcited and they decide they're going to do everything at once. And for obvious reasons, that often backfires because there's a learning curve with any new thing that you're doing and you can't just be mastering 10 things at once. So I like to suggest to people, think about adding 1 or maximum 2 new revenue streams per year. And when you pace yourself in that way, it builds up over time for sure because you can kind of keep the plate spinning once you've gotten it spinning and add more things, but don't try to add more than 1 or 2 new things per year. The second piece that I would suggest is that a common mistake that I see entrepreneurs make is that they often will try to immediately go for the sexy thing rather than the thing that will help them build successfully to the sexy thing. So there's a lot of people who, for instance, will spend a lot of money creating, let's say, an online course, something like that. They market it, they don't have an audience. And so you can't sell it if you don't have an audience. And that is the trouble. So I like to suggest to people instead, if you don't have an audience, try to focus instead on an activity that is audience building first, meaning blogging, videos, podcasts, something so that you can get enough followers that eventually you can sell something to.
You had such a great story right in the beginning of the book, if it wasn't in the introduction, because that's one of the things I always read first. You talked a little bit about your own journey. So talk a little bit about how you went through this process and what you did for your own business.
Yeah, absolutely. I started my business in 2006, and it was a fairly traditional consulting business. I did marketing strategy consulting, so I'd work with different corporate clients, and I felt like I had a diversified business because I had, lots of different clients, but I was kind of doing the same thing for all of them, and it hadn't really sunk in that was the case. But over time, I began to diversify a little bit. I started writing books. My first book, Reinventing You, came out. I was able to start doing a little bit of speaking as a result of that. But so I was slowly growing, but without too much of a strategic plan behind it. But what really hammered it home for me was one day in 2015, I was flying back from Asia, and I just felt like a baller because I was flying business class from Asia, this great flight, all the mimosas. I had been paid to spend 2 weeks teaching in Asia, pretty handsomely, I thought. And then shortly after I got back, I was emailing with a friend of mine who had managed to make twice the amount of money that I had made while I was gone. He didn't have to go anywhere. He had made the money by selling things to his email list. And I thought, wait a minute, what am I missing? I am leaving money on the table somehow. I don't even know how. And I vowed that I would try to understand that a little bit better and get a little smarter about the process.
And that's kind of what you've done for yourself. So once again, you've got these great tips of build an audience first. You can't go wrong with that, with whatever kind of content that you have. And then, of course, creating these things that you're going to sell. Now, you've gone the book route, but you've done some other things. Other than developing courses, what are some other options and ideas for folks?
Sure. And in my book, Entrepreneurial You, I break this down pretty extensively. Every chapter basically is about a different potential revenue source that people could use. But in the beginning, I kind of go from what I'll call the simplest methods to the sort of more advanced and complex. So simple ones, meaning you can start it tomorrow. It doesn't have any overhead or something like that. It might be something like consulting or coaching or whatever. I mean, you can hang the proverbial shingle anytime. Speaking is one. Certainly, it takes quite a while to start getting paid a lot of money for speaking. But if you want to speak for free or just a little bit of money, you can probably start doing that pretty rapidly if you've built up some degree of expertise in your work. Next is, again, we talked about the audience building things. At first, when you get started, you're not going to make money from them. It is to build an audience. But once you start to get an audience, you can then start to monetize it. You can start to get sponsorships and other direct revenue from it, from the blogging, the podcasting, the videos. And then you go on, and there's a lot of other sort of scale-based activities that people could do, whether that's having live events. It could be a big conference. It could be a high-dollar workshop. It could be like an online community. It could be some kind of a subscription service. It could be having an online course. It could be having affiliate income where you sell other people's products and then get a commission from it. So there's a lot of different ways that people can explore based on what they're interested in.
And I think that's really a good point because, when we're talking about experts who aren't making the revenue that's commensurate with their level of expertise, really what you're talking about is selling your expertise. And I think sometimes you were in that space. I get in that space sometimes. I too am like transitioning out. But, you really are transitioning from the doing to more of a business of being. I don't know what to call that.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the thing that everybody likes to talk about, because it's a very sexy thing, is passive income. The sort of the myth that gets dangled is like, oh, you're on the beach and you just check your email and, oh my goodness, another $4,000 came in while I was sipping this martini. And of course we all want that. And sometimes the truth is it actually is like that. It can be like that, which is amazing. But you have to, of course, work pretty hard to get it to that point. And so I wanted to write a book in Entrepreneurial You that was very honest about what it took to get it to that point. You don't just sort of snap your fingers and all of a sudden it's beaches and passive income. There's steps and there's processes. And so in the book, I interviewed more than 50 people who are very high 6 or 7 or 8 figure entrepreneurs, talking about in depth their business strategies, their business models, so that smart people can learn about them and perhaps replicate them in their own business as well.
So you were interviewing these folks, to kind of see what they were doing. And I guess that's how I got to that question, right? Because you were like, were there some things that you were like, what, this like isn't going to work for me? How do you, because I think people just select things. They're like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this, but you kind of select something that's right for you. How did you find that combination that was right for you?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of things that I've sort of expanded over the years because I've been building toward multiple income streams for probably 5-ish years now. So, sometimes in the beginning, kind of in a scattered way, but then more strategically. So I'm now up to 9 different income streams. So there's a lot of things that I'm doing because you have the ability to keep tacking things on. But there are some strategic choices that I've made. So for instance, with podcasts, I love podcasts, and people sometimes say, oh, why don't you have your own? Don't you think podcasts are good? And the answer is, of course, I think podcasts are great. I listen to them all the time. I think they're wonderful. But what I knew was that if you want to do it well, obviously, you need to commit to it. You need to keep it up. And I was not in a position where I really wanted to do that and say, I'm going to podcast for the rest of my life. So instead, I focused on a strategy around the release of my books where I just became a guest on a lot of podcasts. That was sort of my podcast play, as it were. And for each of my books, for Standout and for Entrepreneurial You, I did 160 different podcast appearances. So I spoke on a lot and, hopefully kind of put myself out there in a way that would enable that to happen. But one of the strategic decisions I've made is I have chosen myself not to have a podcast.
Well, that's the perfect place to wrap up. Once people are finished listening and watching this podcast, what is the one thing you would tell them to you other than to go and get the book? They're going to do that.
Yes, absolutely. So besides getting Entrepreneurial You, the one thing that I would suggest that people start to think about is to map out what is your next revenue stream. Whatever you're doing, if you can think, okay, over the next year, I'm going to explore one thing, one channel. Just identify what it is, and then write what the next step is. It might sound crazy and hard to, I'm going to launch a mastermind, or I'm going to, put on an event or something like that. But make that the big goal, but then say, okay, if I were going to do that, what's the one thing that I could do? If you want to run an event, all right, call a hotel and get a quote to see what it would cost to rent their ballroom next year. I mean, whatever the little thing is, to just move the ball forward, test its viability, and see if you want to keep going.
Love that. Thanks a lot, Dory. We're heading off to Bizapalooza Chat, where we're going to be every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you there. I know folks are dying to chat with you.
Thank you. Really glad to be chatting, and thanks a bunch.